There is a moment in every person's life when the weight of silence becomes heavier than the truth they have been carrying. For Shania Twain, that moment did not come at the beginning of her story, when the world first heard her voice. It did not come at the peak of her fame, when she was selling out stadiums and holding Grammy trophies and smiling for cameras with a confidence that made it look like nothing in the world could touch her. It came much later, quietly, in the spaces between interviews and concerts and carefully chosen words, when a woman who had survived more than most people can imagine finally decided she was done protecting everyone else from the reality of what her life had actually cost her. She is 60 years old now. And what she has confirmed, what she has finally said out loud with the kind of calm that only comes from having walked through fire and come out the other side, is this: she was shattered. Not just hurt. Not just disappointed. Completely and thoroughly destroyed by the people she loved most. And then, piece by piece, through surgery and illness and grief and a long painful silence, she rebuilt herself into something no one saw coming. The rumors were always there, swirling around her name for 2 decades. The truth turned out to be both worse and more extraordinary than any of them. To understand what Shania confirmed, you have to go back to the year 2008, because that is where the version of her life that the world thought it knew fell completely apart. She had been married to Robert John Mutt Lange since 1993. He was one of the most celebrated music producers on earth, the man behind records from Def Leppard and AC/DC, the person who heard her potential when Nashville told her she did not fit, the architect of a sound that turned her into the best-selling female artist in country music history. To the outside world, they were a power couple. To Shania, he was her partner, her collaborator, the father of her son Aja, the person she had built 15 years of her life around. The call that ended everything did not come from him. It came from Frederick Thibault, the husband of Marianne Thibault, who was Shania's closest friend and personal assistant, a woman she had met while touring Switzerland in the 90s and trusted completely. Frederick had discovered the affair, and he came to Shania with proof, phone records, hotel bills, details she could not argue her way around no matter how badly she wanted to. She later described the moment to Ellen DeGeneres on national television, saying she did not believe him at first, that she kept insisting it was not possible, that denial was the only thing standing between her and total collapse. He told her he had been watching it unfold for weeks. He told her he had everything she needed to see. And then the truth landed and she had nothing left to hold on to. What the world saw in the aftermath was a quiet divorce, a carefully managed public image, a woman who appeared to be handling it with grace. What was actually happening behind closed doors was something Shania has only fully named in recent years. In interviews and in her memoir, she has confirmed that the betrayal did not simply break her heart. It broke something deeper. She described feeling, in that period, like she did not want to live. She said there were days when she genuinely did not care if tomorrow came. She told Oprah Winfrey that the double betrayal, losing both her husband and her closest friend in the same moment, pushed her to a place where survival felt optional. That is not the kind of thing a person says lightly. That is the kind of thing a person says when they have finally stopped pretending. The cruelty of the situation was layered in a way that is difficult to fully describe. This was not a stranger. This was a woman who sat in her home, ate at her table, knew her son, knew her fears, knew the private architecture of her marriage. The intimacy of that betrayal went far beyond what any tabloid headline could capture. Shania has spoken about how the humiliation reopened wounds that went all the way back to her childhood, back to a cold house in Timmins, Ontario, where safety was always temporary and the people you loved could disappear or turn violent without warning. She said in one interview that the experience felt like reliving her childhood all over again, that sense of having no floor beneath her, of reaching for something solid and finding nothing there. And yet, what Shania has confirmed at 60 is not a story of permanent damage. It is a story of what a person chooses to do with damage that would have ended someone with less steel in their spine. The most surprising thing she has said publicly in recent years is not about the betrayal itself. It is about what came after. In a 2024 interview on the Great Company with Jamie Lang podcast, she was asked about Mutt Lange and she answered without flinching. She said she does not hate him. She said forgiveness, for her, is not about forgetting or excusing what happened. It is about understanding that people who do those things are carrying something broken inside themselves, and she believes he was not well, that stability was something he did not have, and that holding hatred toward him would only keep her tied to the worst chapter of her life. She said, and these are her words, that it is his mistake, not hers, and that she does not carry the weight of it anymore because it was never hers to carry. That level of clarity does not come cheaply. It is purchased through years of grief and silence and rebuilding. And while the betrayal was the wound that opened everything up, it was not the only battle she was fighting. There is another part of her story that ran parallel to the heartbreak, and that very nearly took something from her that no amount of forgiveness could have restored. Her voice. In 2003, while horseback riding near her home in Switzerland, Shania was bitten by a tick. She did not know it at the time, but that small bite was the beginning of a medical crisis that would quietly dismantle her from the inside over the following years. The tick carried the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. The infection went undiagnosed, and by the time doctors understood what was happening, it had affected her nervous system in ways that were serious and unpredictable. She began experiencing sudden episodes of dizziness and loss of balance. She blacked out unexpectedly, sometimes as frequently as every 30 seconds, particularly under the bright lights of a stage. She performed through it, forcing herself to finish shows while terrified she would fall, using every ounce of concentration she had just to stay on pitch and stay upright. The Lyme disease eventually led to a condition called dysphonia, nerve damage to her vocal cords that made her voice unreliable, unstable, something she could no longer fully trust or control. For 15 years, she lived with that uncertainty. Every performance carried the silent fear that the next note might be the one that did not come. In 2018, she underwent open-throat surgery, a procedure during which she was awake for portions so that the surgical team could test her voice in real time. Surgeons made an incision in the front of her neck. Implants were inserted into the vocal folds to help them close properly. She could feel what was happening. She could hear her own voice in the sterile room while instruments were still inside her throat. The surgery left a permanent scar. When her voice returned, it was deeper and rougher than the one that had made her famous, and she has spoken about breaking down the first time she heard recordings of it, grieving the old sound before she made the choice to learn the new one. Then, just as she was rebuilding her relationship with her own voice, the world stopped entirely. Shania was 55 years old and living at her home in Lake Geneva, Switzerland when COVID-19 found her. Because she had lived with asthma her entire life, her lungs were already working at a disadvantage before the virus arrived. The infection was severe and it kept getting worse. Her husband Frederick spent days calling hospitals across Switzerland, trying to coordinate an air evacuation while watching her vital signs deteriorate at home. Hospital beds were nearly impossible to find. When a bed finally opened and a specialized medical team arrived to transport her, she described the experience as feeling like science fiction, like she was being carried to another planet, everything moving in slow motion, the faces around her covered, the fear present but too exhausting to fight. At the hospital, she was placed in isolation immediately. No visitors. Only the medical team and whatever resolve she had left. Doctors began plasma therapy. On the 4th day of treatment, her antibody count had dropped to essentially nothing. Her immune system had nearly stopped responding entirely. What she did not know in those moments, and what she later found out, was that she was already halfway through the maximum window doctors had allowed for her to respond to treatment before they would have to put her on a respirator. The medical team made a deliberate decision not to tell her that. She has said she was grateful. Knowing might have broken the last thing that was still holding on. Eventually, her antibodies began to rebuild. She survived. And in that hospital room, a minister sat beside her and asked her a simple question. What are you going to do with the air? It became the song Inhale, Exhale Air on her 2023 album Queen of Me, written from a place of pure gratitude for something as invisible and ordinary as the ability to breathe. That album debuted at #1 in the United Kingdom. The tour that followed ran for 75 shows across North America and Europe and grossed over $114 million. She headlined the Glastonbury Legends slot in June 2024 in front of tens of thousands of people who sang every word back to her. In early 2025, she became a judge on the 5th season of Canada's Got Talent, bringing her story full circle in a country that first gave her a stage. She confirmed in a 2025 Instagram post that she is actively working on her 7th studio album, heading to a writing session with her guitar and reflecting openly on the challenges of being a female artist in her 60s in an industry that does not always make space for them. Because that is the other thing Shania has confirmed at 60, the thing that exists alongside the personal survival story, and that is in many ways just as important. She has said plainly that the country music industry has regressed for women, that it is more difficult now for female artists to find space and find room than it was when she was rising through it 3 decades ago. She spent her early career being told she was too sexy for the genre, fighting for creative control in rooms full of men who did not take her seriously, building a sound that the industry did not have a category for, and then watching it sell 47 million copies worldwide. She told that the playing ground is not even nowhere near it, and that she cannot find a legitimate reason for why women are being made to work so much harder for so much less visibility. At 60, she is not saying this from a place of bitterness. She is saying it because she has seen enough and survived enough to know that silence on the subject helps no one. The rumors about Shania Twain were always about whether she had really recovered, whether the betrayal broke her permanently, whether the woman who showed up after all of it was the real version or a performance. What she has confirmed, in her own words and over many years of careful honesty, is that both things are true at once. She was broken. And she is here. She did not emerge from what happened to her untouched. She emerged from it with scars visible enough to photograph, a voice that sounds different than it once did, a second marriage to the man whose life was appended by the same betrayal that destroyed hers, and an album she wrote in a hospital room about the miracle of breathing. She has written that she is grateful for everything she has gone through and would not change any of it. That is not a performance. That is a woman who has made peace with a life that demanded more from her than most people will ever be asked to give. At 60, Shania Twain is not finished. She is touring, she is writing, she is speaking, and she is done keeping quiet about any of it. The rumors are confirmed. The story is exactly as extraordinary as everyone suspected. And she is still here to tell it.